just a one moment of reminding everyone, if you do want to make a pledge for the polio, send a message to Rich Curtis or to myself. You could do the chat, which is the icon at the bottom of the screen, or you could send an email. But don't hesitate, let Rich know, and we'll make sure that it's recorded. Next, I want Colton to introduce our speaker. This is an exciting topic. If we go over a little, if we have questions, it's fine. We'll go a little over. But Colton, please introduce.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. I'd suggest, if you all know how to do this, if you scroll over the video for Sarah Porter, she's the one that has the ASU silo, and click the little tilde, you can pin her video, and it helps a lot to be able to kind of just see her and focus on her video. And not to embarrass you, Sarah, and make you the focus here, but that way you guys can have her show a little bigger on your screen while she's talking to us. Sarah, I'm going to go a little backwards on your bio real quick. She went to Harvard College and then went to what I would consider best law school in Arizona. And Chaz, don't take that wrong. I know that there's another with Phoenix School of Law, but she went to the best. And from I see Chaz's face. I didn't pin mine. Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry, there's a third. So
Phoenix is closed, by the way.
Oh yeah, well, there you go. Sarah. So Sarah comes from a law background, did private practice for a long while, did a clerkship with the Ninth Court of Appeals as well. From there, and I know I'm going backwards, Sarah, from your intended bio, but I wanted to get Chaz worked up. So from there, she also went on to the National Audubon Society. She was the Arizona State Director at that time. And I'll let her talk a little bit about her background with those in her presentation if she'd like to. But from there over to the Kyle Center for Water Policy at ASU's Morrison Institute. And at the Kyle Center, they promote research, collaboration, and other open dialogue in support of water stewardship solutions for Arizona. And so she may talk a little bit about that with us as well. Currently, Sarah serves on Governor Ducey's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council. She also does serve on University of Arizona's Water Resources Research Centers Council. So she does work with U of A as well, and the Phoenix Parks and Rec Board. And Sarah, we're really excited to have you. We appreciate you spending the time with us, and hopefully we can all pin your video up here so that we can all focus now on your presentation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. I am hopefully sharing my screen. I hope you can all see it.
Yes, we can.
Great.
It looks good.
Good. All right. I'd much rather you be looking at my PowerPoint than a big me. Appreciate very much the chance to be with you all today. And I have to say thank you to the Rotary for making the environment a priority. I think more and more we're recognizing people who care, like all of you, that everything is interconnected. We can't have public health and healthy people, healthy economies, sustainable economies, unless we pay attention to what's going on with our environment and vice versa. So it's everything. This is the age, I think, of our recognizing how interconnected everything is. I will start today by giving you a little bit of background on the Kyle Center, and then some background generally, as Ben suggested, on water, our water resources. I will try to sprint through a set of ideas about what is going right with water, and then highlight what I would say are the biggest challenges for water, mostly focused on the state of Arizona. I welcome questions. If we were all here live, I would be asking you to just interrupt me at any time. I think it's more complicated on Zoom. I'll try to allow time for questions. It's pretty hard to be watching the chat box during the presentation. Maybe I'll check in, but it'd be better if someone just interrupted if anything's going terribly wrong. Let me just start by saying that the Kyle Center for Water Policy was launched in late 2014. It's named for Senator Jon Kyl. You all know who he is. Retired now, of course, but he himself was a career water lawyer before he went to Congress, and a great water statesman for Arizona in the West during his time in Congress and the Senate. The Kyle Center is part of Morrison Institute for Public Policy at ASU. Morrison Institute was established nearly 40 years ago, and with the idea of promoting informed public dialogue about critical issues in Arizona and the West. And it's really important to us that our work stay nonpartisan, that it be grounded in research and analysis, and historical understanding of the context in which these policy issues arise. In the last 5 years or so, the Kyle Center for Water Policy has been engaged in a big range of water policy issues in the state. A big focus for us, which I may speak about later, is the very heady adjudication, these big lawsuits about water rights covering most of Arizona. I think previously was mentioned the Arizona Water Blueprint. I'll get to that, I hope, something I hope will be a tool for all of you to learn more about water. This is just to show you, we try to spread our wings wide and interfere or get involved in water issues, the range of water issues as they arise in the state. So when I got my job about 5 years ago as the first director of the Kyle Center, people asked me all the time, do we have a water problem? And I thought that was kind of an interesting question. The answer to which is, of course we do. Of course we do. As you're all aware, as people who live in Mesa, Arizona or thereabouts, we don't get very much precipitation. We're an arid or semi-arid state by and large. Anything yellow to orange to red is semi-arid to arid. And so we don't have enough water landing right on the ground here in Arizona to do all of the things we want to do. So we have to figure out clever engineering methods to bring in, to import the water that we need, to ensure that we have the water we need. We've been doing this, as I'm sure most of you know, or all of you know, since time immemorial. The ancient Hohokams where great engineers developed complex canal systems to be able to water over 10,000 acres of agriculture in central Arizona. So some basics, where does our water come from? Well, there are really three main sources of water in Arizona. And it kind of goes 40, 40, 20. It's one way to think about it. About 40% of our water supply comes from the Colorado River. About 40% of the state's water supply comes from groundwater, and about 20% of the state's water supply comes from surface water. This is a breakdown from our water regulating agency, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and you see just a tiny little sliver for effluent at 2%. That's kind of a misleading way of accounting because as we'll talk about later, Arizona actually is one of the national and international leaders in reusing water. This is just the way the department looks at it. It has to be a primary water supply. So let's look at the greater Phoenix area's water sources of supply. It's a little bit different, and the main reason it's a little bit different is because we have the Salt Verde River. So the reason the valley was originally settled was there was this river system, the Salt River, that flowed perennially through the valley. And the ancient indigenous people used that river for farming communities. And later, when the first European American settlers arrived, they saw an opportunity to develop a new agricultural community because of our warmer weather, you could be doing an extra crop per year. So it seemed like a good opportunity, and of course the rest is history. About 40% of our supply comes from the Central Arizona Project, and that's brought in that's our Colorado River water that's imported from Western Arizona, 330 miles across the state to Phoenix and Tucson. And then about 30% of our water is groundwater. That's water that's pumped from the ground. So I mentioned the Colorado River. Of course, the Colorado River is a huge basin. It's the most significant river in the Intermountain West. It really is everything else is pretty much a tributary to the Colorado until you get up into the Pacific Northwest. About 40 million people rely on water from the Colorado River in whole or in part. It serves, and I can hear one of my dogs in the background whining. He's perfectly fine if you hear him. He's just a 16-year-old guy who that has particular needs that don't always need to be met. But the Colorado River serves 7 states, 22 tribes, and Mexico. It supports 4.5 million acres of agriculture, and it is the center of very significant biodiversity across those states. And of course, some very iconic national parks and monuments, including our own Grand Canyon National Park, owe their existence to the Colorado River. As I mentioned before, a good proportion of Arizona's Colorado River water is transported via the Central Arizona Project, that big canal. About 83% of Arizonans live within the CAP service territory, which is really that 3-county service territory, Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties. Yay, the barking. And here is a visual of the CAP canal. If the barking gets really bad, let me know and I'll take some action. The other big surface water supply for the greater Phoenix area, including Mesa, of course, is the Salt Verde system. This is an interesting map that shows the watersheds that supply the water. And if you think about it, as far north as Williams and Flagstaff, as far east as Greenlee County, all the way down to very close to Phoenix, are these big watersheds that encompass 4 parts of 4 national forests. And yet the service territory, which you can see in this little area, this is an out, of course, not to scale. The service territory for those big watersheds is relatively small. And it includes the cities that were here at the turn of the 20th century, when that agricultural community was starting and they were developing out their water resources. And so those cities, which are in this pop-up box, those are within the SRP service territory, and SRP water can be delivered only to the cities that are in that service territory. So that's a constraint that leads to a lot of creativity among water managers. I include this slide because this is basically the story of water in the West. We have huge variability in annual inflows in our surface water systems, as you can see here. And if you've lived here for any length of time, you've experienced that. You remember 1993 was a crazy wet year. It was like being in Seattle. You know, we have these other years that are very, very wet. And often they're followed by a series of years which are comparatively like a fraction of the amount of precipitation. We seem to be in such a situation now. So we have this great variability and yet a consistent demand. The red line on this slide shows deliveries, which is a substitute for demand. The way SRP and the way the Colorado River managers deal with this tremendous variability is storage. We have reservoirs. There are a total of 8 reservoirs in the SRP system. We have Lake Mead and Lake Powell on the Colorado River and a bunch of other smaller reservoirs. And those enable large amounts of water to be stored so that we can have consistent, flat deliveries rather than living through the feast and famine variability that our surface water systems would provide otherwise. I want to remind you all, because a lot of people, especially if they haven't grown up in Arizona, think we don't have rivers, we don't have water, but that Arizona really has a number of watersheds. This is a wonderful map that shows the watersheds and basically the flow of water in Arizona. Our 2 biggest rivers are the Little Colorado River up in the northeast, and the Gila River, which flows across the state from New Mexico all the way to the Colorado River. Both are tributaries of the Colorado River. So that's where our water comes from. Now we'll talk about where our water goes. In Arizona, the annual demand, I think Ben mentioned 7 million acre feet. It's probably a bit lower than that, though that might be fair. The statistic I use is about 6.25 million acre feet. About 2/3 of the water across the state goes to agriculture. About 1/4 of it goes to municipal uses, and the rest goes to industrial uses. And by industrial, we mean that's a kind of grab bag, including mines, utilities, dairies, trailer parks, a bunch of large water users that typically aren't served by a municipal system or by an irrigation district. So I mentioned acre feet and acre foot. I love, this is the volumetric that's used in water planning in the Western United States. It's very much tied to our agricultural past. It would be an aquarium 1 foot high, the size of an acre. I like to tell people, think of a football field with an aquarium across the whole field minus the end zones, and it amounts to about 326,000 gallons. These days, efficient modern households use about 1/4 of an acre foot per year. So let's look at the greater Phoenix area demand. It's a little bit different, as you might expect. A lot less water goes to agriculture in the greater Phoenix area, only about 1/3 of the water. About half of the water is going to municipal uses. Again, we have industrial uses and tribal water uses. About 11% is allocated to tribes. This is the greater Phoenix area, not Phoenix itself. All right, so that's my background so far on where our water comes from, where our water goes. Now let's talk for a minute about what's going right. This is the biggest, this is a wonderful graphic from the Department of Water Resources that tells a really important story. The blue teardrop marked line shows water demand, statewide water demand between the mid-50s and 2017. As you can see, water demand in the state peaked in 1980 or thereabouts and has slowly declined since that time. In the meantime, as you can see from the orange line with the little figure on it, our population has grown from about 500,000 people to about 7 million people. And our economy has grown from about $20 billion. This is our gross domestic income. It's grown to be a multiple, like 19 times that amount. So we've had huge economic growth, big population growth, and yet our water demand today is about the same, slightly lower than it was in the 1950s. So that is the #1 really big takeaway. The next big thing we did, and if you take away anything from today, I hope it will be this. It's that Arizona passed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. We celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Groundwater Management Act on June 12th. The blobs that you can see in this map are places where we imposed a cap and trade system on groundwater. That's water pumped out of the ground. You can imagine that without a cap and trade system, you can have a tragedy of the commons situation, which we're seeing in some parts of the state. There's no limit on the development of wells or how deep a well can go. And so you have people move in and drill deep wells, sometimes deeper than their neighbors, resulting in lack of control over demand. And as we are seeing in some parts of the state, people with less deep wells discovering suddenly that they're not able to pump any water out. Well, in 1980, we addressed that problem where almost 85% of Arizonans live. We have a cap and trade system on groundwater, meaning that you can get credits for storing water in the ground. If you have a grandfathered right to pump water, you can get credits for leaving it in. You can sell those credits, they're negotiable. And this cap and trade system has inspired a huge amount of creativity. That's one of the reasons why Arizona is a national leader in reuse. About 95% of the water that's reclaimed is reused. With the Groundwater Management Act, we have mandatory system level conservation, meaning irrigation districts, farms, municipal providers, industry, golf courses all need to meet conservation standards. And the biggest thing of all is the 100-year assured water supply requirement. We imposed a discipline requiring that new development can't occur unless the developer can prove that the developer has a 100-year supply of water. Sorry again about the barking. It's my little cow dog. The Groundwater Management Act also is a good first effort at tying growth to renewable supplies in especially the active management areas of Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson. In these places, in the Pinal AMA, I should say, well, let me say that each active management area, and I'm just going to shut the door here. Sorry, just a sec. Today would be the day that they go nuts. Each active management area has a management goal. And the management goal for the Pinal AMA, you know, it was traditionally an agricultural AMA, and there was a kind of acknowledgement that, you know, farms need a lot of water. And so the management goal for the Pinal AMA is about managing the groundwater for a planned depletion of resources to enable agriculture to continue for as long as possible. The management goals of the Prescott, Phoenix, and Tucson AMAs is very different. The goal for those AMAs is safe yield, meaning that we achieve a long-term balance between the amount of water that's taken from the ground and the amount that is recharged either by nature or by humans. So that's the safe yield goal is a really big deal in the Phoenix, Prescott, and Tucson AMAs, because it means that we're managing water to try to get away from the mining of groundwater resources, and instead think of groundwater as a long-term backup supply for times of shortage. So that's two things that have gone right in Arizona. Here's a third thing that is a good sign, and that is that agricultural demand has been declining. It had a very significant decline in the 80s, and it has sort of leveled off since then. But we've gone from being a state where 96% of our water is going to agriculture, to a state where, as I said before, just about 68% of our water is going to agriculture. Now, a lot of this has to do with the retirement of farming in the greater Phoenix area. If you've lived in the East Valley for some time, you've witnessed this yourself. That has, since the Groundwater Management Act passed, that has been the plan for the area, that we would retire agriculture and build cities on top of it. And typically acre for acre cities use a lot less water than agriculture. But another reason for this dramatic decline is that agriculture has become much more water efficient than it was back in the 80s and 70s. Farmers make huge investments in water efficiency in order to be sure to be able to produce the most crop per drop. You saw the blob that's the Phoenix AMA, and this tells you the story of what has happened with water use by sector since we passed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. You can see the blue line shows municipal water use. You can see that it has gradually gone up. Not surprising, since 1980, our municipal areas have had a dramatic increase in population. And meanwhile, agricultural water use has declined steadily and continues to go down. But the yellow line shows you that total water demand really hasn't changed much in the greater Phoenix area in the last 40 years. To me, that's a little bit of a distressing sign. I would like to see a decline, and we're not seeing that. In the Sun Corridor, that would be the Tucson, Phoenix, and Pinal County areas, the three active management areas. It's a similar story, though agriculture has hung in there and continued to be the highest sector water user. And that's largely because there isn't that much urbanization in Pinal County. And so that demand has stayed pretty high. There hasn't been urbanization replacing agriculture. Here is a very important point, though, for cities that have been here a while, like Phoenix, Mesa, Tempe, Glendale, Peoria, Chandler. What's going on in Phoenix that this slide tells you has been going on in all of those older cities. While populations have been increasing, the total amount of water that's used per person has been declining. And in particular, the amount of water that's used per household has been declining. And so this means that cities that were here when the SRP, and have are on SRP project lands, and were here when the CAP was established and allocations were made in the late 1970s and thought to get a big allocation of CAP water. Those cities have resilient water portfolios of a variety of sources. They have some groundwater, they have some maybe two kinds of surface water, they have effluent, and they're finding that the demand per person is steadily going down. And that means they can stretch the supplies they have to accommodate a great deal of growth. And they are very, very resilient, those cities. A stand-in for which cities I mean is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, AMWA. Those are the 10 largest cities in central Arizona, and they tend to have extremely diverse, robust water portfolios, and they're experiencing this gradual decline in per capita demand that enables them to stretch the supplies they have over the populations, over their expected build-out growth. Here's one of the reasons why. We're changing in the way we use water in our home. This is Phoenix's wonderful graphic depicting, it's from an aerial view of a typical, what they say, a typical Phoenix neighborhood, and this is between 2007 and 2013. The greener the square, the higher the percentage of the landscaping is turf. So this is 2007, 2010, 2013. There's a big conversion away from the landscaping of my childhood, where most people had I grew up in Phoenix, lots of Bermuda grass, citrus trees. We're moving away from that and embracing more native plants and other elements that cause a net reduction in water use. By the way, outside landscaping is often over 50% of a household's water use. So according to the city of Phoenix in the late 70s, about 80% of homes were 80% turf. And 5 years ago, it was under 15% of homes that were majority turf landscaping. It's something that's happening in cities all over. The upshot of all of this is to say, you can have more people, you can have a bigger economy, and you don't necessarily have greater water demand. And I think what's really important here, the message here is, it's about management. The groundwater, we only got to this place largely because of the Groundwater Management Act, which spurred a push toward conservation. It spurred creativity. It's had a huge impact on us. So I'm worried about time here. I could go on to our challenges, Ben, but I don't, I see you said a few more minutes. So
We can absolutely, there may be a few questions.
Okay.
Some members may need to break, but please go
Okay.
ahead. We have a few
Well, I want to put out one, let me just go to one thing that I would say, and thank you, is our biggest challenge. And that is, let me go to, there's all this other good stuff we're doing. So we don't have time for that, but let's go to what I think is the single biggest challenge. I can get down to this, and that is not the Colorado River. It's about growth. That's what I think is our biggest challenge. The Kyle Center produced a very, I would say it's a water geeks report called The Elusive Concept of the Assured Water Supply, the role of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District and replenishment. But in a nutshell, when we passed the Groundwater Management Act, we made a commitment to grow on renewable supplies. But a few years later, it became apparent to some places that this was going to be a challenge because they didn't have access to those renewable supplies. They might have a little allocation of them, but they didn't have the infrastructure to deliver those. So Arizona enacted laws that enable development on groundwater, on mined groundwater, with essentially a promise of replenishing that water by enrolling the lands in this CAGRD, which is run by CAP, and then it's CAP's problem to replenish the water that's used. Now, in Arizona, it's predicted that about half of real estate development in the coming decades will be in this replenishment district. And the problem is, it's twofold. We don't know where the water for replenishment is going to come from. That's one big problem. And the second is, these developments are occurring on mined groundwater. They will run out of water at some point. And in that instance, it is going to happen at a time when it's harder and harder to find water, the water that they need. So this is to me, it's alarming. It's something that will be a problem a couple decades from now, not today, but in Arizona, we don't plan water based on next year's crisis. We plan it by looking at what's out there decades from now. So I would say, I just want to close by saying, we have a lot of water challenges in our state. I could talk about the issues of the Navajos, but I would say, I'm going to just get to my last slide, that the issue of maintaining our discipline over growing on renewable supplies rather than on supplies that we're mining away is extremely important. We shouldn't be growing communities on finite terminal water supplies. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Ben, I've got some comments when they get finished with the questions. This is Dill.
Okay.
Well, maybe there won't be questions. I guess I'll comment anyway.
I have a
Well, Sarah,
question.
it was interesting to hear your talk. This club used to every summer have a talk about water and water use. And in part, that's because we had the people that developed the RWCD project.
Mm-hmm.
We had people like Ray Killian, the Pattersons, the Dobsons, even the Morrisons, the Fitches, and Jay Rhodes as our congressman. They would come in every year and talk to us about what's happened with the CAP. And that took them 40 years to finally get it finished and reported that they came in, that we did it, you know. So it's very interesting. The only thing you didn't cover was a miner's inch. Other than that, a very good.
Thank you, but that's right. I mean, your point that it took 40 years, it was even more than that. Carl Hayden started talking about the CAP probably in the 20s or the 30s, and the first delivery was in 1985. I think Carl Hayden's life was extended by his commitment to get the CAP financed and built. Somebody put in the chat that I hadn't mentioned the DCP. I appreciate that very much. The Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan is a plan by the 7 states and Mexico to try to preserve water. I can get back up to a quick slide to try to take steps to keep Lake Mead and Lake Powell functional. So Arizona had a really hard time coming to a place where we could sign on to the DCP for 2 reasons. One is, unlike all the other states, we have to have legislative approval to sign on to any Colorado River change in our Colorado River compact. So it became political. We needed legislative approval. And the other reason is we were talking about people taking a cut. The CAP has junior priority. I really should say the water users on the CAP have junior priority in the lower basin. And so if there's a cut to Colorado River deliveries, it hits those users first. So the slide I have up shows you in a nutshell who's impacted. The DCP is an agreement to take certain sizes of cuts, and it's spread out among the states, but Arizona takes the biggest. If Lake Mead reaches certain low levels, in this case, shows the priorities from highest on the bottom to lowest on the top. And you can, in brief, the DCP is designed to prevent Lake Mead from dropping to a point where we'd have a tier 3 shortage, which would be a cut that starts to impact municipal users and tribes, the highest priority users. So the DCP, the first line of cuts would have the most impact on agriculture in Pinal County. They have no priority when it comes to rights to Colorado River water. It impacts home building and tribes who have lower priority water, and some new cities who depend on that water if the next level of cuts, but basically it's about securing the highest priority users. And that's sort of good, but one thing that I always think is important to note about the DCP is that aside from agreeing to take cuts, the DCP is a set of accounting rules that incentivize Colorado River rights holders to keep water in Lake Mead. Without the DCP, no water user would have any incentive to leave water in Lake Mead. The DCP provides rules that say, well, under certain circumstances, you can take your water out. You can leave your water in and it has a tag on it that has your name. So it's the biggest part to me of DCP is not the cuts, but rather the incentivizing conservation in Lake Mead.
So, Sarah, can I ask, how are we doing, Ben? Can I ask another?
Jen, go ahead, absolutely.
Okay, so on the DCP, have we started on the first tier of cuts as anticipated this year, since we started off good, but this year.
Yeah, we're actually in tier 0. I didn't even depict it on that slide, but there's a tier 0, which is where we've been for a long time. And so that, let me see, I think I have that here. So we're up here. I mean, we're there. If we don't have good snowpack, the Bureau of Reclamation has greatly increased the risks of a tier 1 shortage. So you can see here, that would mean cutting into this priority pool here called NIA, non-Indian ag, and that would affect some additional users. What really, let me see if I can find a slide. What really made a difference is, what has made a huge difference with the DCP is how much water we've saved. So this slide is a little bit dated, but the slide shows where Lake Mead would be the dotted line were it not for all the water conservation that's happening because of DCP. So this is at the end of 2019. I need to find the updated slide, but it shows you all these colored bands are water that's been saved by water users thanks to DCP. And it's kept Lake Mead at a much more functional level. So hard to say how we're doing. We didn't have a good year of precipitation, got good snow, but not good rain, about 56% of average this last year. So we're not looking as good as we did a year ago.
Okay, so I think we're about on the cusp of hitting it at some point. So we're just kind of holding our breath.
Yeah, we're very close to the level that would be a tier 1 shortage, 1075. So we could well go into that tier 1 shortage. We're now in a place below 1095 called tier 0. And we're still, Arizona is conserving about 200,000 acre feet per year in Lake Mead because of that tier, that's part of our agreement at tier 0. We would conserve that. Only water managers can come up with a tier 0.
And since 40% of our water supply is from groundwater, are we measuring our retention of that groundwater, and is it depleting?
Yes, we have a good amount of measuring within the active management areas, and we are still in an overdraft situation in all of the active management areas except the Tucson active management area, which will probably go into overdraft with some more build out of demand. Outside of the active management areas, we do not have a good grip on how much water is being depleted, because when we passed the Groundwater Management Act, those rural parts of the state, they didn't want to have to meter and report. They still don't. Every well owner in the active management areas has a meter and reports how much water they're using. That isn't happening outside the active management areas. And so we're seeing groundwater mining problems pop up in different parts of the state. I would say Wilcox Playa down in southeastern Arizona is the place that's suffering the most. In Wilcox area, big new industrial ag, Cochise County, in fact, has moved in, greatly increasing water demand. We're also seeing the same thing in Mojave County near Kingman. Big industrial ag moved in. There's no regulation of wells. They're free to dig very deep wells and withdraw large amounts of water. And that gets into a kind of cascading situation where groundwater is definitely being overdrafted.
I promise, last question. Do you think within 10 years, 20 years, will we see water rationing as far as within the cities, the municipalities, to their customers, the residents? Probably
some, not in Mesa, not in Phoenix, not in those old AMWA cities where they have very robust water portfolios. Water rationing, can mean different things, but will there be very strict limitations on what water can be used for? And, pushes to use very little water for outside landscaping. Some of the growth parts in the far east and far west valley, they just don't have the water for the growth that they hope for. They just don't. There are different solutions for them, but there's a lot of I feel like it's starry-eyed visioning about growth without making sure of sufficient water supplies for that growth. So I don't know if rationing will be the direction they go. I think it's more like not having some of the growth that they aspire to. But places like Mesa, Phoenix, Tempe, Glendale, those cities have really done a good job of creating very robust water portfolios. I should throw in Chandler, to not have to get to a point where there's water rationing. And they're finding that water demand is going down year after year, 1 to 3% per year. And those they can use that decreasing demand to bank supplies, and they can use the decreasing demand to stretch supplies. So they're sitting really pretty. That's why I call this the water haves and have-nots. That's my conclusion. There's huge variability. When I have friends who are moving in from out of state, I want to know, where are you thinking of buying a home? Because there's some places where I would say, don't look there. Look in a place that has a much more robust water portfolio.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking all the questions.
Jen, great questions. And Sarah, this is a terrific program. And I hope that sometime down the line, maybe you'll come back and just talk about Lake Mead next time.
I could be happy to spend an hour on Lake Mead, or 30 minutes. Yeah, Colorado River.
Down the road, let's plan that.
Okay, and let me just, I love that you plugged the Water Blueprint, but this is a tool that we developed, and we have a story map gallery on this website, azwaterblueprint.asu.edu. You can go to the story map gallery. We're adding to it gradually, and you can drill down into augmentation, groundwater, where, the big picture, where water comes from, and other issues. So I would encourage you to please go to it, and then definitely let us know what you think of it and how we can make it better.
Thanks for a great program, Sarah. It's been terrific.
My pleasure.
Well, Uncle Saguaro Sam will finish with W.P. Hunt's quote of, in Arizona, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting.
Hey, by the way, since Dill brought it up, his cog from today is incredible. Everybody should take a look at it. If you haven't, look at the German Mark story from 1922. Take a look at that. Next week, we're going to hear for a few minutes, at least, from Carol. She's going to update us on the Alzheimer's walk, and there is some preparation there, and we're making plans. Chaz Workin is going to talk to us about his Pikes Peak adventure next week, and that's going to be neat. Following that, our district governor will be here, and she's going to conduct a meeting, and she's going to tell us about Arizona and Rotary. It's good stuff. And later in the month, actually in the 1st of November, the 4th of November, our fire chief, Mesa Fire Chief, will be here, and she's going to talk to us about Mesa Fire Department. That's going to be a good meeting as well. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for staying over, everyone. It's a good topic. We've got more to do. Look forward to seeing everyone next week. Talk again. Have a good day.